All right, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Taylor Clem. I'm with IFAS Extension here in Nassau County. I'm the environmental horticulture agent as well as the county extension director. And today, as part of our program, I'm joined by Shirley Lohman. She's one of the Master Gardener volunteers, and she's going to be helping out in the webinar. And today's program is all flowers of fall. So what we want to do in this program today is just kind of talk about what are some of the plants that we can see flowering. Some are ending their flowering period in the fall. Some will start to see blooming in the fall. So this is a great way of thinking about how do I have color year round in my landscape. You know, usually that gray areas, we're covered spring and the summer, but thinking of fall and winter to make sure we have year-round interest. You know, sometimes we're left scratching our heads thinking, what could I put in my landscape? So these are a lot of really cool plants to get you covered in that fall period. So we are recording this program and we will put it up on our YouTube channel later on. So then you can go back to it and we'll follow up with an email with the link as well as some additional resources that can be super handy. So if you have to leave early or if you come in late, you have the ability to kind of just still get access to that program. So again, thank you all very much, and feel free that anytime throughout the program, you can put your questions in the Q&A, or you can put them in messages or comments into the chat box. Shirley and I have access to those. So anyways, let's go ahead and get going. All right, so I always like to start my programs out with these essential questions. So at the end of the program, you should be able to answer these questions. What is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program? And what are the types of flowering plants we could plant and expect to flower in the fall? So of course, it's not an exclusive list. There's way more that you can use, but a lot of these are pretty good, easy ones that you can find relatively easily locally. Sometimes you might have to stretch around to find them, but there are just some good examples that you can use. So first off, let's start off with the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. And it's like, well, Taylor, why are we talking about the FFL program as part of thinking about flowers for fall? So the FFL program is all about how we're managing our ornamental landscapes, or managing our yards. And it's really kind of an integrated use. Ultimately comes back to having an attractive, aesthetically pleasing yard, but it also attracts wildlife. It's environmentally responsible. It really helps conserve water and protect water quality. It is less work than a traditional landscape, kinda. It depends on ultimately how you want to manage it. But when we look at the landscapes, from reducing our inputs and what we're doing in the landscapes, the Florida Friendly is definitely going to reduce your workload overall. Unless you just choose to do things a little bit differently, which could increase it. But anyways, so that Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, and this is why it's important. We have these 9 principles that help guide that program. And this is a statewide program, not just Nassau County, but every county extension office throughout the state. We're talking about this Florida Friendly Landscaping Program because it's for homeowners, it's for professional landscapers, it's for builders, developers, it's for your community leaders, etc. Because we're thinking about Florida's resources and how our landscapes play a role in to help protect and conserve them. And these 9 principles are those kind of guiding principles to help us work towards having those sustainable landscapes. So, the first principle is right plant, right place. And that's really putting plants into the landscape that naturally want to thrive. So we may have a landscape that has certain sunlight qualities, has a certain amount of moisture that's available. So we're going to put the plants that thrive in those conditions that we want to plant in. So then once we plant them, they establish, they're happy, healthy. You don't really have to do much to them. There's a lot of times when a plant is the wrong plant for the wrong place, and you're constantly having to do input and work with it in order to keep it just alive. And that's a lot of input. It's a lot of work. And at the end of the day, it's not environmentally responsible. It's not a beneficial use of Florida's resources. So right plant, right place. And we'll we'll talk about that more, because with this program, of course, we're going to talk about those plants that are flowering, but we're also going to talk about those environmental conditions in which they do best. So it allows you to kind of say, what are these plants that we're going to talk about today, and which ones can I bring into my landscape? So the other principles are water efficiently, fertilize appropriately, mulch, attract wildlife, manage yard pests, recycle, reduce stormwater runoff, and protect the waterfront. So next week, next Wednesday, so a week from today, we're actually doing a Florida-friendly landscaping crash course. So if you want to learn more about these, you can always sign up for that crash course, and we can jump into more details about these principles. But for today's program, it's more right plant, right place. And the reason that's important for us is because approximately 60% of homeowner water use in Florida is for lawn and landscape irrigation. So that is a contributor. It can lead to a contributor to declining aquifer reserves or groundwater, lead to saltwater intrusion, which is always a concern with coastal communities, as well as that excessive water use can carry off a lot of nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, which is a contributor or significant contributor to those green algal blooms that we're very familiar with throughout Florida. So that's why with the Florida-friendly landscaping, we're reducing water use, selecting plants that naturally thrive. And then the next thing you know, we're having improved water quality or reducing the impacts of residential or developed areas, a lessened impact on our water. So, it says plants for summer landscape. So what we're going to be talking about is our colors for fall. And I broke it up into kind of three main categories, which is annuals and perennials, ground covers and vines, and shrubs and grasses. So I considered doing trees in here, but there's not too many trees that are actually flowering. There are some beneficial uses of some of the flowers that we do have available, some trees, a lot of aesthetic quality in the fall, but a lot of that is not going to be associated with the flowers. So I kind of left them out for this discussion today. So we're going to be talking about annuals, perennials, ground covers, vines, and then shrubs and grasses. So before we get going into any of this, I want you to put something in the chat box. Tell me what is some of the plants that you know that flower in fall that you may have in your landscape or in your garden. Go ahead and put that in the chat box. Mum's the word. Yeah. Oh, fire spike, salvia. Oh, those are all great examples. So we're definitely going to talk about mums. We do have sunflowers, some sunflowers in here. Yeah, plumbagos, wonderful. Yeah, fire spike. So yeah, these are amazing plants. So there's some that they are extended summer bloomers that we might end up seeing the blooming starts to fade out this time of year as we start to get into the fall season. Oh yeah, hurricane lilies. I didn't put hurricane lilies on this list because it's so sporadic, but hurricane lilies, oh, I love those. So, and they will be blooming in this time of year. So have you had any of your hurricane lilies bloom yet? Or are they going to start? They're going to probably start coming out more towards the end of this month, early next month. Coming up now. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. So yeah, obviously there's some plants that you all mentioned that we are going to talk about in this program. And there's also a lot of plants that you all mentioned that we're not going to be talking about in this program. So like Turk's cap, that's a wonderful one. And we can have some of the hibiscus, they're going to be blooming this time of year. So let's go ahead and we'll jump into some of these annual and perennial highlights. These are a lot of them I choose because I like them too. So, but let's go ahead and jump into them. So the first one, obviously, Elliotts Aster. This is a great native plant that we have. I really like it because if you have a more of a natural setting, something that you can put kind of like on an edge, maybe like a wet area or a wetter area that gets plenty of sunlight. These are wonderful plants that you can put in kind of like a margin. They don't like salt. So if you are within the coastal area, then I would like coastal area, like if you're right on the beach, community, then you may not have too much luck with these. But if you're inland at all, you can definitely try Elliotts Aster. Beautiful plant. It does. It's a great wetland garden. It likes partially drained. It doesn't want to be swimming, but it does like having a lot of moisture available. It does have a pretty moderate drought tolerance. But, you know, because it's being a plant that really loves a lot of moisture, if that area dries out too terribly much, you'll definitely see decline in it. They can get kind of tall. They can get about 4 feet to 4 feet tall and about 2 feet wide. So they like to grow up a little bit. But some of the things that I really like about it is I really like that fine texture of the flower, that light blue, whitish violet color that you get in the petals. And it's a clonal plant, so it can actually grow pretty quickly. So I know in some situations when people have planted the Elliotts Aster and they're like, oh, I had to cut a bunch out, it's going a little bit quicker than I anticipated. But you're going to see this is one of those plants that you're going to see flower primarily in the summer, but it carries through early fall. So Elliotts Aster. Do any of you have Elliotts Aster in your garden? Sometimes it's viewed as more of a naturalistic plant. So some people will put it in containers. Wonderful. So yeah, a couple of people are putting them in there. Great. And of course I had to put mums because there's so many, the mums, there's so many that you can get, variety of colors, etc. So I would recommend, there's primarily like 2 different types of mums that you can get. You can get the florist mums and you can get the garden mums. So for us, I would recommend using the garden mums, which is actually, instead of a Latin name of chrysanthemum, it is actually a dendranthema. And it is also called the mum, and they're grown a lot together. Usually you're going to see it's a little bit more upright than a typical compact mum. So what we're going to do is you're going to see it kind of grow a little bit more upright, but not too much. It's about 1 foot by 1 foot is the dimensions. It's going to like that full sun, the partial shade, and like well-drained to moderate soils. And it has a moderate drought tolerance. And one of the reasons that we prefer using the garden mums compared to the florist mums is the garden mums are actually going to create rhizomes and stolons in the ground. So as our days get shorter with mums, they prefer those shorter amounts of daylight. So that will encourage them to bloom through the fall and into the winter, or through that early part of spring. So they really look at those short days for prime blooming. So when they grow those stolons and rhizomes, say we have a really bad freeze, it comes in and it can kill them back. Those stolons and rhizomes, you can have those mums pop right back up. Whereas a florist mum, they're not going to really generate or grow any stolons or rhizomes. So you might completely lose your mum if there's a dieback. But at the same time, that's one of those things that you can really, it's really up to you, but just knowing that there is a positive and negative associated with them. But mums, they're classic. If any of you are vegetable gardeners, this time of year, the Nemagon marigold, I know we didn't talk about in here, because I know people are purchasing them a lot with mums. Those can always be interplanted within your garden. It's like a little side note. That's good for nematodes. But anyways, so mums are always wonderful. There is one question that popped up, say, when I say fall, what time period am I referring to? So I am talking more about the season of fall. You know, so some of these plants might be early fall, some of them might be later fall, some of these plants you'll see all throughout the fall. But when we're talking about these time periods, we're talking about just, the season of fall. So, and fall technically starts next week, I think. I can't remember that date. Someone could put that in the chat box. I don't know. I can't remember. I saw it like 2 weeks ago. I can never remember when the season changes. But anyways, So chrysanthemums are a great annual perennial that you can put in your garden. And in some situations, you know, because of the stolons and rhizomes, I've seen some of them pop back up in that subsequent year. So forked blue curls. So this is a beautiful native wildflower that we do have. This is a beautiful native wildflower that we do have. And hardiness zone kind of 8 and 11, so it grows great here in Nassau County. They do prefer full sun, likes the well-drained soils, and it has a really high drought tolerance. And it's compact, about 2 by 2 feet, and it will end up dying back when we get really cold time of year. In like the winter, it can die back, or you'll end up cutting it back. But it's a wonderful thing about it is it's a self-seeding wildflower. So what's going to do is as it ends, it's going to self-seed and you'll have it pop back up the next year. In some situations, I know it can get a little unruly. It can spread pretty easily, but this is a wonderful plant that you can incorporate into your landscape. And it has such a unique flower. You can smell it from a ways away, and it's going to attract dozens of pollinators to your garden and landscape. So just like a lot of our full sun plants, it has more of a fine texture to it, but I really like that fine texture. And you can, it's hard to see, but in this image, some like its backdrop, there are some canna lilies that are with it. So it's a really good contrasting plant that you can put in with plants have a coarse texture or larger leaves. But this is the forked blue curls. Do any of you have this in your garden? Len, you do have everything. It's wonderful. So forked blue curls, this is a great one. And if you know somebody with this, you can always ask if you can try to harvest some of their seeds. And by doing so, you can help, you can plant some of your own that subsequent year without having to go to the nursery to buy some. So fire spike, this is one that popped up earlier when I asked some of you all about what are some of the plants that you may have in your yard or your garden that might be starting to bloom or that you know about. And fire spike, this is a great plant that you can put out. And right now it is blooming. It's self-seeding, but we do encourage you prune it in the winter to help control its size because it can get a little bit large. But it's about 4 feet tall by 2 feet wide, so it's more upright and erect. But it likes that full sun to partial shade. It prefers well-drained soils, and it does have that high drought tolerance. So, and this is a great example when you look at the flower type, it allows you to kind of determine what kind of pollinators you can expect to see. So because it has these tubular flowers and fluorescence with it, so what's going to need is going to need a pollinator that can get its proboscis or it can get down into the flower to get that nectar. So you're going to see things like butterflies or even some maybe even hummingbirds pop up and that are attracted to this fire spike. So it's a nice little plant that you can use potentially attract wildlife. So with the annuals and perennials, obviously, this is where you're going to get a lot of flowers, a lot of color, and a lot of interest into your landscape. But I did put it some bonus plants because I know that I could talk a long time about these different annuals and perennials. But here are some of those additional annuals and perennials that you can get that I just took away from the list, like snapdragons. Those are wonderful plants that you can put in your landscape this time of year. Calendula, that's another good, wonderful plant that you can put in this time of year. Beach sunflower, I love beach sunflower. I mean, it's on here, but it's also flowering pretty much all year round. It's great, especially if you're over on the beach area. Because it does prefer those well-drained soils, and it is a cool little native sunflower, that helianthus. And then also the Gabira daisies. Those are wonderful plants that you can put in your landscape and give you a very bright, bold punch of color in your garden. that is really nice accents. I don't really think it's much of a pollinator plant. It will attract some, but it really gives you some really cool aesthetic quality to it. And gerberas, you can buy those daisies almost everywhere. I feel like they're very common. Same with the snapdragons. The beach sunflowers and the calendula, you can find those at a lot of our local nurseries as well. So now we talked about annuals and perennials. So let's talk about ground covers and vines. So I kind of lump these together just because they can have somewhat similar characteristics in how they're used in the landscapes. Does anybody know what this is in this picture? Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's right, nasturtiums. So this is these, well, we'll talk about this in a second, but I love these because yeah, they're super ridiculously pretty. They're easy to grow and you can eat them, which is really cool. So it's wonderful for like an edible landscape. So then you have multiple purpose plant. So let's talk about some of these ground covers and vines. So gopher apple. So I don't know how many of you do have gopher apple. This one, it can definitely be hard to find. You'd have to get it from a native nursery. But I really like just the using this in a very sandy location, a natural type of planting as a ground cover. I really love the white flower clusters, the inflorescent clusters that it has. It kind of just rises up out of the leaves in this ground cover. So we can definitely grow it here. It does wonderful. So it's going to need full sun, well-drained soils. It's very drought tolerant. It's more of a spreading, sprawling plant. So you're going to have it be about 1 foot tall at most. But it's not going to be a super dense plant. So, sometimes when I've seen this in the landscape, people will come in and intermittently plant more of it to try to make the stand denser, because usually it's a little bit thinner than most ground covers. But it's going to be flowering through the summer and into the early fall, and you can still see this blooming. So you're going to see a lot of this in our native landscapes or our natural landscapes. But it definitely has some really cool ornamental qualities to it that you can bring into your landscape, into your home. But gopher apple, and it's also a cool name. And I'm not going to go over the scientific names. I mean, I can if you want, but. So the next one that we have in this section is nasturtiums. So, I mean, these are easy, wonderful plants. You can have them, you can kind of train them to grow up like a little trellis. You can keep it as a ground cover. Beautiful, bright colors, the orange and the yellows. It does really well in the full sun, well-drained soils. And it has a moderate drought tolerance. It doesn't get too tall. Sometimes I really like using this ornamentally as an edge plant. So along a walkway, just like that low areas, along a walkway, along the edge of a planting bed, just because it kind of helps fill in that space. So it looks really cool if you intermix this with, say, like a sweet potato vine or some other small annuals and perennials. It adds a really cool different pop of color and texture. And then one of the neat things is this is also an edible plant. So if you're managing it appropriately to be an edible, you can bring it in, clean it, add it to your salad, and it has a really neat peppery flavor to it. So we actually do have some commercial agriculture here in the state where people are growing this for salads. And yes, they will do wonderfully well in containers. They do really, really well in containers. So you can plop them in, let them grow, and you can pull them in and out to help protect them, especially once they do start to get a little bit cooler to help prolong it, but they do need that full sun. So have any of you had this ever within a salad before? Yeah. So yeah, I would really make sure that, don't just go find the flowers and the leaves and just go munch on them. Make sure they're grown appropriately. So if you get them from somebody that's growing them for food, absolutely. If you're going to grow them yourself, make sure that you're treating them as an edible plant and you're cleaning them appropriately. But they sometimes do get mixed up with, like, people will think it's a dollar weed when it's not, because of that very unique leaf shape. Canapes. Yeah, you've had 8 canapes. That's wonderful. But it's a cool plant. It looks awesome. It's flowering this type of year. It gives you really, really cool color pops. And then it's also tasty. So this one can be a little bit harder to find, but it's the purple bell vine. I love this one. So this one can be so hard to find. I made sure that, because with some vines, I'm sometimes non-native ones, I'm very cautious with, to make sure that they're non-invasive. Like the flame vine, which is a high risk invasion risk, which would have been a vine I used to have in this presentation, but taken out. But the purple bell vine, I love that. I like this because of that cordate leaf, that unique heart shape. But then I love how the flowers they hang down like those little purple bells. And one of my favorite garden colors is purple. I used to say blue was my favorite color, but I actually think purple is my favorite color. It has a really cool contrast, that purple flower with the green leaves. It just adds a really cool color, really cool contrast to the garden. You're going to want to give this something to grow on. Our cool temps will knock it back, so you'll have it summer to fall. And it usually doesn't get too terribly tall. Like, you can let it grow kind of on the ground. It doesn't look as well, but giving it something to grow up on, like a trellis, is going to be most ideal, because then that's when you get the full benefit, or an arbor, something to really allow those flowers to kind of pop out and shine and really do their thing. So, and a really neat thing that's about this plant is, even if you look at the margins of the leaves, it can be hard to see. They have a pinkish purple hue to them, which is really cool. So they do well in that sun to part shade. And this is one of those plants that, if you're leaning more towards the part shade, you're probably gonna have a much healthier one. But if you're gonna have a little bit more sun, you might get more prolific flowering. So it's kind of a toss up on which one will do best, but we are on the most northern edge of where we can plant them. But this is a really cool, beautiful plant, purple bell vine. All right, so we went through annuals and perennials. We covered the ground covers and the vines. So now we're getting into shrubs and grasses. So the really neat things about the annuals and perennials is they allow you to come in and you can add pops of color that are very seasonally, or you can expect plants to kind of like come back each year, but they do die back. The vines and the ground covers, they can help fill in that horizontal space along the ground, or they can help add some vertical color in a very tight spot. But one thing that's really cool about these shrubs and grasses, whether they're a lot of these that I picked are going to be evergreen, they become what we call that massing plant. So they're the plants that you can really use to help structure and put your garden or your landscape together. So I'll put a lot of these in big clumps, not just individual. Some you can do individually, but I'll put them in big clumps because they help kind of really create a dynamic landscape. So shrubs and grasses, they're going to help hold that structure and hold that garden together throughout the entire year. So yeah, I had to put this one on here. Someone put in the comments, Thryallis. This is my favorite. I think it's the first one. So I think everywhere I've lived in Florida, I've always planted one of these. So this is the Thryallis, or it's also called the Rain of Gold. We're on the northern edge, 9A to 11, so you can pretty much grow it all throughout the state. Now, this technically can fall underneath the perennial category, but if we're not going to get like super, super bad freezes, this thing's going to persist. So you can use it really well as like a shrub in this part of the state. So it really likes that full sun, well-drained soils, has a moderate drought tolerance, and it will get to about 6 feet tall. You can prune it to kind of keep it a little bit more compact. There are some other varieties that are available or cultivars, but this flowers almost year round. It does have a poor salt tolerance, but if you do keep it protected from salt spray, then you should be all right. So one of the things that I really like about this is obviously the yellow flowers and that persistent flowering throughout the entire year, is the smell. So I also call this plant the peanut butter plant. Do any of you know why? Have you ever smelt the Thyralis? So it's not the flower. So if you smell the flower, you're not going to smell a thing. But do you know why I would call it the peanut butter plant? Well, it smells like peanut butter. That's what it does. So next time you're around a Thyralis, pluck off a leaf. So the little stem at the bottom of the leaf is called the petiole. And the petiole, I'll draw it where it's at. You can see it on the screen. So that's the petiole, that base of the leaf. Now, if you put the petiole and you smell that base of the petiole where it was connected to the branch, and you smell it, it smells exactly like peanut butter. It's weird, but it's really, really cool. So sometimes when I'm working with youth and kids and really trying to get them interested in horticulture, it's like it's like almost all of them love peanut butter. They're like, this plant smells like peanut butter. And then they smell it and they're like, oh my gosh, that's the coolest thing. So this is a wonderful plant that you can use as a massing plant in your landscape. It gives you something cool to talk about. And as well as, let me erase that now. Cool. It gives you something to talk about, year-round coloring, and it does have a nice little form to it. This you could plant right now. You can plant it anytime, really, in the landscape, and it should establish nicely. But this is the Thyralis. I almost went on a tangent of other plants that I like to teach to kids, but I decided not to. So, of course, Plumbago. Plumbago. So this one, I think you have to be kind of like hit or miss on. Some people love it. Some people don't like it because they think it might look too weedy or too leggy. And I don't disagree with that concern of Plumbago, but you can always do structural pruning with it, and it actually can do it. It can make it better. It can promote healthier growth with that Plumbago. This is one of those plants that if you do that periodically, it really likes it. But anyways, Plumbago, one thing that's really, really cool is it has a flower. Its flowers are very reminiscent of a hydrangea flower, kind of just like that shape, that kind of clustering, completely different leaves, of course, than a hydrangea. But it has that really cool blue color, and it's gonna flower year round. All year round, it's going to be covered in these blue flowers. It looks wonderful. It needs full sun. It's well drained, needs well drained soils, and it can get kind of big. So you need to, if you don't want it to get too big, you can always keep it pruned back a little bit because it can help it out, or just make sure you put it in a space where you want it to grow. Because I've seen a lot of times where people put Plumbago in a space they didn't anticipate it to get as large as it did. So, and yeah, in the chat box, and you can see that, there's the Alba, the cultivar that you can get where it's the white flowering version. So this actually comes predominantly, it's this blue color, but you can go get the Alba cultivar. There's a couple others that have variable colors in them, but the Alba you can go get, and it's going to be white. So I'm a Kentucky grad, so don't hold it too much against me. And my parents are Kentucky alumni as well. I've been meaning to get my mother and father a white Plumbago because they have a bunch of blue Plumbago in their backyard. So it's like, I'll sprinkle in some white so then they can have, you know, a little bit of Kentucky in their backyard. So Plumbago, easy plant. The ones that are in their backyard now, I planted maybe 10 years ago, and I don't think they've touched them since. So, and they're looking wonderful. And then, of course, our native Camellia patens. So the firebush. This is a wonderful plant because it's flowering year round. You're getting these beautiful, 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 beautiful red flowers on them. And it is a host plant and nectar source. Do you all know what butterfly that is in that image? So there's a lot of variability, but that, yeah, it's a zebra longwing. So this isn't the host plant of a zebra longwing, but it's definitely a nectar source for it. And the zebra longwing is our state butterfly, which is cool. So yeah, zebra longwing. And again, those tubular flowers is going to attract something that has a proboscis, you know, like a butterfly or a moth. It can unroll or stick into those tubular flowers. But this is one of our native plants. It is tough as nails. It likes that part shade to shade. So think about having a shade garden where it's like, oh, I got nothing that can really grow too well. Bam, plant the firebush. It's going to give you an awesome punch of bright, warm colors, which is great to have in a shady landscape. And these do great. And these are evergreen. You're going to have them all year round, which is really cool. Now, if we do have, like this happened in the Panhandle, or if we do have a really, really, really bad freeze for multiple nights in a row, it can kill these back, but boink, if they're established, they're going to pop right back up as soon as it's warm enough. And they'll come back probably more vigorous than they were before. So with this has been cultivated a lot in the nursery trade because of how versatile and tough of a plant that this is. So you can get a lot of cultivars of this. There's the I can't remember the name of it, but there's a dwarf version of it that is going to stay more compact. It's not going to get as big as that 8 foot by 7 feet. And as well as there's the lime sizzler, which is really, really cool. It's kind of like a limey green variegated variety or cultivar of the firebush. And it too is more compact. So those are really good. If you like have a space, it's like, oh man, I have shade and I have to plant something in front of a window. The regular firebush is going to get too big, but you can easily get one of these dwarf varieties and plop them in, and ooh, it looks good. And then you'll have a lot of butterflies visiting that you can look out the window. And I see one question in the Q&A that do they do well in containers? Yes, these do great in containers. You can plant them in container. Obviously, for the normal native variety or the native firebush, it's going to probably be too big for a container. Unless you have unless you have a larger container, you can plant one in. But you know, those dwarf cultivars are wonderful for a variety of containers that you can put in and get that like lot of interest. Like as a good filler for a container, I would bet. So this is the firebush. This is one of those plants I always encourage people to plant. If you have that part shade, the shade conditions, and you want wildlife, get this one in. Get this one in. Next is swamp sunflower. So we are probably starting to see them flower right now, but they are going to persist in their flowering through the fall and into the winter, and they'll die back from our cold temperatures in the winter. But they have good salt tolerance. I mean, look at that explosion of color. So they do like full sun, but they do need to have poorly to moderate drained soils. They do like having more of a wet condition, since the name swamp sunflower. They do have a moderate drought tolerance, but they get tall. And at the one garden in the past, I've seen them, they actually planted this next to the downspout of the building. So like all the plants around it were like, I need well-drained soils. And then all of a sudden it was like, bam, you know, this giant clump of swamp sunflower. So yeah, you can use this in a rain garden if your rain garden holds on to moisture for a little bit longer than normal. But this is a great plant. It gives a lot of height though. It gives way more height than I think most people anticipate. But it is absolutely gorgeous. And it's one of our native plants too. So you know, if you live in the coastal areas along the dunes and you can plant in some of those well-drained areas, this could be, or not in some of those more wet areas, this could be a great plant. But then also going back, the dune sunflower is also a good alternative for natives. That's small, low-growing ground cover perennial. So, oh yeah, yeah, looks great with goldenrod. That complementary color, or that mono color, that yellow. So yeah, this is a wonderful plant. Swamp sunflower. Ooh, here's a native one. So I made sure that I put this picture where it's like all purple. This is a giant massing plant or massing muley grass. So this is just one of our clumping ornamental grasses that we're going to start seeing flowering right now. They are either already flowering or you're going to start seeing them start to flower soon. I think they look best in large clumps rather than kind of like in this image on the bottom right. You see it's kind of like a singular muley grass. There's very, very, very fine texture. And it likes to kind of spread and fall a little bit. So if you put it in big masses, it looks more like a really soft textured purple cloud. So it's very adaptable to conditions. You could put this along, you can't put it in the water, but you can put it along like retention ponds, streams, etc. It has moderate salt tolerance, which is really cool. It's very high drought tolerance. It loves full sun, and it is wonderful flowering plant. And muley grass, a lot of times we'll cut it back. I don't cut my muley grass, or I don't recommend cutting muley grass until right before spring new growth, because it's going to flower and you're going to have that purple flower persist into the fall, but then it starts to brown as as it goes dormant. And it still looks really nice. I think it holds a really cool form, especially in a mass. And then at the end, like right before we're about to get that new flush out, cut it back, give it a haircut, cut it back to about 12 inches off the ground. That's going to give it that haircut range. And there is also a variety. I think it's called White Cloud, but it's the white form. It's the white cultivar of this. And again, it's really, it's a cool thing. So, I mean, you all have probably seen this. It's starting to flower right now. This is a very common ornamental grass. So why do you think cutting this back would be beneficial to its part of its annual maintenance, or you can do it every other year? Why do you think that'd be the case? Put that in the chat box. I'm going to see, and then I'll see if anybody knows, and I'll let you know one of my theories. Ooh, I have people stumped. So I'll give you a clue. Well, I don't know. What would be a good clue? So I'll tell you. So the muley grass, its native environment here in Florida is in a lot of our pine stands, like our longleaf pine stands or pine flatwoods areas. And those areas burn. Fire is an important part of their ecosystem. So muley grass, evolutionarily, it has grown in a fire-dependent ecosystem. So obviously you can't have a fire come through your yard and burn your muley grass. It probably wouldn't be a very good idea. So what we're kind of doing is when we're doing that cutback, it's kind of simulating what would be a typical control of muley grass. And it so has evolved over time with having that burn back that it enables it to grow quickly out of that. So usually that's why I recommend, or one of the reasons I believe is why we're doing that recommendation, because it does pop back really strong and healthy afterwards. And that's just because it has evolved in a fire dependent ecosystem here in Florida, or elsewhere, wherever it's native. So at least here in Florida. So so we had one question that come in that said that they think they killed theirs. They tied them back in order to weed behind them, which people do. There's nothing wrong with that. But then they didn't remove that and left them like that, and then it rained. And then when they came back, everything was like brown and dead and just wasn't looking too bad. And then they asked, do I need to replace them? So in that situation, it's like, no, let's see how they recover. It could be a death associated with them, but if you cut them back, it could encourage that new growth, and they'll be like, bam, I'm happy and healthy again. And there are times where you do have to replace mule grass because it's not a long living turf ornamental grass, but you can definitely get good 5-10 years out of them if you manage them appropriately. And then of course, camellias. Camellias sassacus especially. So Camellias sassacus, there's multiple different types of camellias. So there's the Camellias sassacus, there's the japonica, there's some hybrids, etc. So camellias bloom at different times of years, but the camellias are blooming essentially from fall all the way to the early spring. And we separate them in early, medium, and late bloomers. And the Camellias sassacus specifically are predominantly going to be those early blooming varieties that we can start seeing them bloom right now. So one of my favorite ones that I like to use like ornamentally within a landscape as a shrub that you do in big massing versus like I'm going to use it as a showpiece is the Shishigashira camellia. And it is a really nice, easily maintained. You really don't have to do much. It stays small, and it's starting to bud out right now in the ones that I have, and we'll see them go to flower here very soon, and they'll pretty much persist with those flowers all the way up through the new year. But then if you interplant, if you have other camellias, you can interplant with those medium blooming and then prolong the flowers that you have. Typically, I don't recommend late blooming camellias because then we end up getting too hot in our spring and it can be very tough for those camellias. But the Camellias sassacus, those are going to be the specific camellias that we're going to see predominantly being those early blooming camellias. And camellias are wonderful, easy to grow plants, minor disease issues. They do like part shade, so they really give you really cool color if you have more of a shadier landscape. They do like those well-drained acidic soils, and they do have a moderate drought tolerance. So another nice thing is they are typically a little bit smaller than the japonicas, but there is a drawback, a slight drawback. The sassacus, they are more simpler in their flower structures, like you see in this image. Usually like those really complicated, like the penny type flowers or the variegated, the double blooms, all those crazy types are typically going to be japonicas or hybrids. And a lot of them are going to be your mid-season or late season bloomers of your camellias. But still, that's a bright, beautiful, wonderful flower. So it's important that as we talk about what plants do well, it's important to know, this isn't the all-encompassing list of things that you can plant in the fall, but this is just like to get your motor rolling, just make you thinking about, ooh, what are some other cool things I could go plant? Or think about how can I have color to my yard once we start getting this cooler and fall season and winter season even. But it's important to also know that there are no-no plants. These no-no plants are like our invasive species or anything that, we see a lot of these in the landscape, and you can even buy a lot of our invasive plants in garden centers. So the IFAS assessment or the US the UF assessment is a great web page to go to kind of just look up plants to determine if they are invasive or not. So let me, I'm going to switch screens so you can see that web page super quick. So do you all see that now? If I switched it correctly, you all should see it. It's my web browser. Wonderful. So it's a pretty simple website to use. You can type in any plants pretty much, and it'll tell you if they have an assessment on it. So like on this picture, that's Mexican petunia. So you can type it in, and then here's a bunch of, it's by Latin name, but you can just hit enter. That's not working, but you can pick one of these. So the simplex, the very common ones are these. So this says that it's a caution plant, but this is also, this Mayan purple is a variety. So this is actually a sterile variety that was developed in Mexican petunias. Even though sterile varieties are showing signs of being an invasive plant, which is kind of ridiculous. So like another example is coral ardesia. So you can come on here, prohibited. This is actually illegal, just flat out illegal to sell. So you can go on this website, and it's a really handy tool that you can look up plants and to see if they are considered invasive or not. There's other ways that you can do, like click on view all assessments, and you can come up here and you can filter results. So you can specifically say we're north area. So you can specifically kind of filter out and see what you want to make sure. So like invasive, some of these terms can be a little confusing. But you can start to pull them up and kind of see which ones in the area are specifically ones that you can see that are considered invasive, etc. So it's a super handy website. I recommend going around and playing it on this. Here's one that I know a lot of people used to have, a Juga, but it's considered a high invasive risk. So this was as of what, 4 years ago? 2017, 4 years ago. So, but anyways, that's a really handy website to really, if you just want to double check, is this an invasive plant? How to determine if it's an invasive, the IFAS assessment page. And that's going to be something that we do send to you all in that follow-up email, just so you have that as a cool, handy little reference. So those are no plants. Just make sure, Florida-friendly landscaping, you can't have anything invasive. That's our big thing, is you can technically get a silver recognition from the Florida-friendly landscaping program if you have an invasive species in your yard, but that is under the assumption that you're working to control it. And it's kind of coming in from encroaching from other properties. But if you're using it as a landscape plant and you have no intention to remove it, then no. But anyways, so that's the assessment webpage. Great little resource. So you need more ideas? Always reach out, Florida-friendly landscaping program. You can go, I'll send the links to it as a reference, so as a resource, but also we have it's free now, used to be subscription. It's an online plant selection guide. So we have those books, but the plant selection guide has way more plants where you can select the environmental conditions that you are trying to plant and grow in, and it'll pull up the plants that grow well in those conditions. So if you're not sure what to buy, you can look at what you want to plant in, look at those environmental conditions, right plant, right place, and it'll pull up plants that we know grow well in those conditions. Make it a little easier. So now that we're at the conclusion of the program, we'll go back to those essential questions that we talked about right at the very beginning. And that is, what is the Florida-friendly landscaping program? So that's that statewide the statewide program that we use at the university to really think about right plant, right place. How are we using our resources appropriately to really make sure that we're protecting water quality and quantity, and to preserve Florida for what Florida is. It's in natural ecosystems. And then as well as, what are the types of flowering plants we could plant and expect to flower in the fall? So obviously we mentioned a lot of plants as annuals, perennials, those vines and ground covers, as well as those shrubs and ornamental grasses. This isn't, and these are the only things that you can get, but these are common ones, relatively common ones, but that you should be able to find, and they can be very successful in this area. So lastly, it is, you know, as part of IFAS extension, the primary extension office is over here just north of Callahan next to the fairgrounds. We also have our Yulee annex that is over off of Pages Dairy Road here in town. But you can always reach out to us, send us an email, you can give us a phone call, that number for any types of horticulture related questions that you have, reach out to me. We're here to help you all, to help you use horticulture, be stewards, as well as have awesome, amazing, beautiful yards. But thank you all very much for creeping up right at 4:30. And here's, oh yeah, another slide. So here's my contact information if you want to reach out to me. We have a Facebook page. We do have an Instagram page as well. And we just updated our YouTube channel. So that's where a lot of our recorded webinars will end up getting posted. So you can go back and reference them at another time. But anyways, we have a few minutes for questions. So feel free, if you have any questions, shoot them out to us in that chat box or in that Q&A. But I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and it's been a lot of fun because this is, you know, just talking about some of the fun plants that we like that I was able to share with you all. But thank you all very much.
Taylor?
Yes, ma'am.
We did have one